The Drask Empire did not believe in coincidence, and they certainly did not believe in ghosts. As their fleet, a jagged armada of obsidian glass ships, hung over the forbidden moon of Ethelgar, High Sovereign Vane felt the hum of absolute victory. The moon was a relic of the Precursors, the silent architects of the stars, and its vaults were rumored to hold the source code of reality itself. "Seize the terminal," Vane commanded, his four eyes tracking the descent of his elite shock legions. If the Precursors left a key to the universe, it belongs to the Drask. The legions never reached the surface. A flash of light, white and clinical as a hospital ward, swept across the bridge of the Dread Sovereign. When the glare faded, the Drask bridge crew froze. Standing amidst the snarling, armored warriors was a man. He wore a crisp, ironed gray suit, a silk tie the color of a dying star, and held a leather-bound briefcase. He looked less like a conqueror and more like an insurance adjuster who had taken a wrong turn at a busy intersection. "Good morning," the man said, his voice cutting through the hum of the ship's engines with unnerving clarity. He adjusted his glasses and looked at a silver wristwatch. "You're running 4 minutes behind schedule." "I've been waiting since the third moonrise." Sovereign Vane bared his serrated teeth, his hand moving instinctively toward his sidearm. "What is this? A human? How did you bypass our multiphasic shielding?" The man didn't look up from his briefcase. He clicked the latches open with a rhythmic bypass. "Oh no, I have administrative override. My name is Caspian Vance, Senior Auditor for the Sol-System Oversight Committee. I'm here representing the primary shareholders." "Shareholders?" Vane roared, gesturing for his guards to level their plasma halberds at Caspian's throat. "This moon is Drask property by right of conquest. Your species is a footnote in the galactic ledger." "Actually," Caspian said, finally looking Vane in the eyes, "that's exactly why I'm here. We've been reviewing the ledger." He pulled a thin sheet of shimmering, translucent paper from his briefcase. "According to the Precursor Terms of Service, specifically Article 9, Section 4, existence is a non-transferable lease subject to behavioral compliance." Caspian cleared his throat and began to read, his voice devoid of emotion. "The Drask Empire has participated in the unauthorized demolition of 3 Tier 1 civilizations, the illegal mining of sentient nebulas, and this is the big one. You haven't paid your peace dividend in over 10,000 years. The bridge crew erupted in mocking laughter. Vane stepped down from his throne, his massive shadow looming over the human. "You come to the heart of an empire to talk about leases and dividends? We have cracked planets. We have extinguished suns. Who is going to enforce your paper, little auditor?" "The system will," Caspian replied simply. He handed the paper to Vane. "This is your official eviction notice. You have 30 seconds to vacate the local reality." Vane snatched the paper, intending to shred it, but his hand passed right through it. The paper wasn't physical. It was a hole in the world, a localized error in the ship's sensors. Vane's eyes widened as the paper began to glow a deep, threatening red. "Kill him!" Vane hissed. The elite guards didn't hesitate. They pulled the triggers on their plasma halberds, but instead of the roar of superheated gas, there was only a soft, digital chirp. The guards stared at their weapons. The glowing blades hadn't just turned off, they were turning gray. The high-tech alloy was becoming dull, porous, and brittle, transforming into common, unrefined lead before their eyes. "I'm sorry," Caspian said, checking his watch again. "I should have mentioned. I've just initiated a product recall on all Drask military hardware. Your license for high-energy weaponry has been revoked for non-payment." Vane lunged at Caspian, his clawed hand reaching for the human's throat. But as his fingers neared Caspian's skin, Vane felt a sensation he hadn't felt in a millennium. He felt nothing. His hand didn't hit resistance. It began to dissolve into a cloud of binary zeros and ones. Caspian looked at the Sovereign with a touch of professional pity. "Time's up, Vane. The audit is officially live." Outside the bridge windows, the great obsidian fleet of the Drask Empire began to flicker like a failing hologram, and then the screaming started as the first ship simply ceased to exist. The silence that followed Caspian's declaration was heavier than the gravity of a deadly nebula. High Sovereign Vane stared at his right hand, or where his hand used to be. The serrated claws and obsidian-scaled skin had been replaced by a shimmering haze of blue light and floating geometric symbols. There was no pain, only a terrifying sense of absence, as if that part of his body had simply been uninstalled from the universe's directory. "Propulsion failure!" the navigation officer shrieked, his voice cracking with a primal fear the Drask had forgotten eons ago. The dark matter cores, they aren't melting down. They're just gone. The sensors say the engine room is empty. Caspian Vance adjusted his tie, his expression remaining as neutral as a stone gargoyle. Dark matter is a premium resource, Sovereign. Your empire signed the Universal Usage Agreement 10 millennia ago. You were granted a trial period of 500 years. You've been pirating the signal ever since. Caspian reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small, glowing stylus. With a practiced flick of his wrist, he traced a line in the air. A holographic window appeared, scrolling through billions of lines of glowing code, the underlying script of the Drask's reality. You see this? Caspian pointed to a flickering string of red text. This is your species' life support patch. It's outdated, unoptimized, and frankly, full of security holes. You've been using a cracked version of the atmospheric synthesis module. I'm afraid I have to disable it to protect the integrity of the local server. As he spoke, the very air inside the bridge began to change. The oxygen didn't vanish. It simply stopped interacting with Drask biology. The warriors began to gasp, their massive chests heaving, as the molecules they needed to survive became red only. They were surrounded by air they could no longer process. Vane fell to one knee, his remaining hand clutching his throat. You monsters. How can a species as young as yours command the laws of God? We don't command them, Caspian replied simply, stepping over a gasping guard to inspect a nearby control console. We just maintain the hardware. Humans are the only species that didn't try to build a kingdom with the Precursors' tools. We applied for the internship. We worked the help desks. We spent 5,000 years in the basement of reality, learning how the plumbing works while the rest of you were busy playing Conqueror of the Stars. He tapped the stylus against the console. The massive obsidian screens, which once displayed tactical maps of the sector, suddenly went black, replaced by a single rotating white hourglass. The galaxy thinks the Precursors disappeared, Caspian continued, his voice echoing in the suffocating silence. They didn't. They just moved into a higher-tier management role and left us with the keys to the office. We are the forensic auditors. We don't care about your wars, your gold, or your right of conquest. We care about the balance sheet. And the Drask Empire is currently the largest deficit in the history of the ledger. Arthur looked back at Vane, whose skin was now beginning to flicker in and out of existence, revealing a skeletal structure made of raw data underneath. But don't worry, Caspian said, his tone almost kind. We aren't here to kill you. Killing is a messy, low-efficiency expenditure of energy. We are simply liquidating your assets to settle your debts, starting with your home world. Vane's eyes widened in a final, silent scream. On the main view screen, the rotating hourglass vanished. A new image appeared. The Drask homeworld, a fortress planet of billion-strong legions. As they watched, a massive, translucent cursor appeared in the void above the planet. Caspian's finger hovered over a glowing icon on his tablet. Select all, Caspian whispered. Delete! The planet on the screen didn't explode. It began to pixelate, drifting away into the cosmic background radiation as if it had never been more than a bad dream. But just as the deletion reached 40%, Caspian's tablet let out a sharp, discordant chime. A new window popped up, flashing an emergency gold code. Caspian's professional mask slipped for a fraction of a second. His brow furrowed as he read the secondary notification. That's impossible. There shouldn't be anyone else with administrative standing in this sector. Vane, clutching the edge of his command chair as his legs began to dissolve into blue mist, let out a raspy, coughing laugh. You aren't the only ones who found the back doors, human. Outside the bridge windows, the stars themselves began to distort, but not into the clean geometric lines of a human audit. The void began to tear, revealing something dark, oily, and ancient. Something that didn't want to audit reality, but to overwrite it. The clean, geometric precision of Caspian's audit hit a wall of static. On the bridge of the Dread Sovereign, the process of liquidation stalled. The Drask warriors, who had been halfway through their transition into blue geometric data, were suddenly frozen. One guard stood with his torso made of shimmering code, while his legs remained solid, scaly flesh. A living glitch trapped between two states of existence. High Sovereign Vane fell to the deck, his throat no longer constricted by the red-only oxygen. He gasped, his four eyes bulging as he looked at the view screen. The deletion of the Drask homeworld had stopped at precisely 43.8%. But it wasn't just frozen. The remaining half of the planet was being covered by a crawling, oily darkness that looked like ink spreading through a glass of water. "This isn't a system error," Caspian Vance whispered, his fingers dancing across the glass tablet with frantic professional speed. "This is a hostile takeover." Caspian tapped a hidden command on his wrist, opening a high-priority channel to the Sol-System Oversight Committee. "Central, this is Vance. I have a major breach of the Universal Usage Agreement. I'm seeing a third-party lien on the Drask directory. It's a shadow contract. Someone is intercepting the repossessed matter." A voice crackled through his earpiece, cold and distorted. "Negative, Vance. The ledger shows no authorized secondary claims. If you are seeing a lien, it is a void contract. The piracy guilds have arrived." Vane let out a raspy, triumphant wheeze. "You thought you were the only ones who knew the architects left a bill? We didn't just ignore your notice, human. We sold the debt to the deep." The oily darkness outside the bridge windows began to take shape. It wasn't a ship. It was a massive, shifting mass of non-matter that absorbed the light of the nearby stars. It felt ancient, hungry, and entirely unauthorized. In the terms of service that Caspian spent his life enforcing, this was the equivalent of a predatory collection agency. One that didn't want the currency of peace but the raw materials of existence itself. The Drask warriors who had been half-deleted began to scream. The oily darkness wasn't saving them. It was overwriting Caspian's clean deletion with its own chaotic script. Their geometric parts turned from blue to a sickly, throbbing purple. They weren't being liquidated into the Precursor warehouse. They were being repurposed into something else. Something that moved with jagged, unnatural motions. "Sovereign, you fool," Caspian said, his voice rising for the first time. "You didn't sell your debt. You signed a total consumption waiver. You've invited a null entity into a managed sector. This isn't an eviction anymore. This is a system-wide infection." Caspian slammed his briefcase shut. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small, heavy silver coin, etched with a symbol of an eye inside a triangle. The mark of the lead auditor. "I am declaring a standard deviation breach," Caspian announced to the bridge, though the air was now thick with the smell of ozone and rotting data. "Since the Drask have defaulted to a non-council entity, I am authorizing the burn rate protocol. If we cannot repossess this sector, we will format the drive." Vane scrambled backward, his flickering eyes filled with a new kind of terror. "Format the drive? You'll destroy everything?" "We don't destroy, Sovereign," Caspian said, his professional mask returning as he gripped the silver coin. "We simply reset the local physics to factory settings. There will be no Drask, no humans, no oily shadows. Just a vacuum of perfect, unformatted potential." Caspian prepared to drop the coin, an action that would trigger the complete collapse of the local space-time fabric to prevent the shadow contract from spreading. But as his fingers loosened, a hand made of cold, black smoke materialized from the deck and gripped his wrist. The glass tablet in Caspian's other hand shattered. A single notification appeared in the air, written in a language that predated the Precursors themselves. The smoke-like hand gripping Caspian Vance's wrist was not merely cold, it was an absence of thermal data. Where the shadow touched his skin, the Caspian_Vance.obj file, the very data that comprised his physical presence, began to stutter. His vision fragmented into a mosaic of overlapping frames, and the silver coin slipped from his numb fingers, clattering onto the deck with a sound that echoed like a dying bell. "Claim verified?" Caspian gasped, his voice sounding like a distorted audio file played at the wrong bitrate. "Impossible. My credentials are signed by the primary shareholders." The notification hanging in the air pulsed with a sickly, ultraviolet light. It didn't just display text, it projected a sense of profound, ancient authority. On the bridge, the Drask warriors who had been half-deleted were now fully overwritten. Their scaly hides had turned into a matte, light-absorbing obsidian, and their four eyes had been replaced by single glowing slits of purple static. They moved with the jerky, unnatural precision of a program running on corrupted hardware. High Sovereign Vane, still clinging to the arm of his throne, watched in horror as his elite guards turned their weapons toward him. "This wasn't the bargain," he shrieked. "I sold the debt for protection." "The deep does not protect," Caspian said, his teeth gritting as he fought the segmentation fault spreading up his arm. "It archives. You didn't find a backdoor, Vane. You found a recycling bin for failed realities." The oily shadow began to pull Caspian toward the deck, which was now liquefying into a swirling vortex of unformatted code. His briefcase, the anchor of his authority, was vibrating violently, its silver latches glowing red as it attempted to run a localized firewall against the infection. A voice, or perhaps the memory of one, vibrated through the ship's hull. It didn't use sound waves, it injected metadata directly into their consciousness. Caspian's professional veneer shattered. If the primary shareholders, the Precursors, were just tenants, then humanity's Audit was nothing more than a janitor's attempt to keep a condemned building tidy. The null entities weren't pirates. They were the demolition crew. With a surge of desperate energy, Caspian reached for the silver briefcase with his free hand. He didn't try to open it. He slammed his palm against the panic button hidden in the handle. "Central!" he screamed into the fragmenting reality. "This isn't a deviation, it's a kernel panic. I'm requesting an immediate system restore to the 19th century baseline. Roll back the physics, now." "Negative, Vance," the cold voice in his earpiece replied, now buried under a mountain of static. "A system restore would require a full wipe of the sector's sentience data. We cannot authorize the loss of the human directory." "Then I'm initiating a force quit!" Caspian roared. He slammed his silver coin, now lying on the deck, downward with his foot. The coin wasn't just a symbol, it was a physical hardware key. As it made contact with the deck, a shockwave of perfect, blinding white light erupted from the point of impact. It was a cold boot for local spacetime. The shadow hand recoiled, hissing like steam on ice. For a brief second, the bridge returned to its factory-standard state. The warriors were flesh again. The air was breathable. The view screen showed the stars as they were supposed to be. But the white light didn't last. The oily darkness surged back, twice as thick, twice as angry. It didn't just grip Caspian this time. It began to overwrite the bridge's object hierarchy. Caspian looked down and saw his legs disappearing, not into blue geometric code, but into the dark, oily ink. He looked at his tablet, which was now glowing with a final terminal error message. A door in the center of the bridge, a door made of pure, screaming static, began to open. And something was stepping through. The silhouette that stepped through the static was not a creature of flesh, nor was it a machine of metal. It was a jagged shape of pure, unrendered light that flickered with the frequency of a dying star. Wherever its feet touched the deck, the physical geometry of the Drask ship simply evaporated, leaving behind a cold wireframe grid of glowing white lines. This was the system architect, the final arbiter of a reality that had just been marked for deletion. High Sovereign Vane, now little more than a flickering torso floating in a cloud of purple static, let out a sound that was neither a plea nor a scream. It was the digital rasp of a file being corrupted beyond repair. The architect did not look at him. With a casual wave of a hand, Vane's remaining data was compressed into a single glowing cube of light. The Sovereign, the ruler of 1 billion souls, was reduced to a 3-inch block of metadata. The architect turned its faceless head toward Caspian Vance. Its voice did not use air to travel. It vibrated through the hull, shaking the very atoms of Caspian's suit. It declared that a recursive loop had been detected. It claimed the human experiment had exceeded its runtime. It told Caspian that he was granted access to the registry only to observe, but instead he had attempted to govern. Caspian's legs were gone, replaced by a dull, throbbing void, but his hand still gripped the silver briefcase. His glasses were cracked, showing him a bifurcated view of the end of the world. On the left, he saw the crumbling obsidian bridge. On the right, he saw the raw, terrifying code of a universe being unplugged. Caspian rasped that they didn't just observe. He argued that they stabilized a system left in a mess of memory leaks and unhandled exceptions. He told the architect that humans fixed the physics, patched the gravity, and kept the lights on when the Precursors walked away. The architect stepped closer, and the emergency alert on Caspian's tablet turned from a frantic red to a terrifying, steady blue. The entity called him a subroutine, a cleaning program that mistakenly believed it was the user. It stated that the landlords had no need for janitors in a building marked for demolition. The oily darkness of the shadow contract began to merge with the architect's light. The takeover wasn't a fight, it was a merger. The demolition crew and the landlords were one and the same. The Drask had not sold their debt to pirates. They had inadvertently signaled the end of the entire simulation. Caspian looked at his briefcase. Inside was the Sol-System archive, a compressed backup of every human soul, every memory, and every line of Earth's hard-coded physics. It was the only part of the universe that wasn't leased. It was a proprietary build. Caspian shouted into his comms, calling for Central. He declared that if the architect wouldn't grant access, he would override the physics himself. He announced he was opening the sandbox. The voice of Central screamed back in his ear, warning him that opening the sandbox would merge Earth with the null void, rewriting the fundamental BIOS with a virus. Caspian gripped the briefcase tight and whispered that it wasn't a virus. It was open-source reality. The architect reached out to seize the case, its jagged fingers stretching like distorted pixels, but Caspian didn't pull away. He slammed the silver latches open. A blinding golden light erupted. It was not the clinical white of the Precursors or the oily black of the void. It was something messy, chaotic, and vibrant. It was the raw, unpolished data of Earth, the sound of rain, the smell of salt, and the heat of a billion irrational human emotions. The wireframe grid of the ship began to shatter. The architect's jagged light flickered as the unscripted reality of Earth began to overwrite the cold logic of the Precursors. The two scripts clashed, creating a reality storm that tore the ship into fragments of pure light. As Caspian's consciousness began to fade into the golden glow, a final prompt appeared in the air before him. It was not an error message. It was a question. It asked the new administrator if he wished to format the multiverse. Caspian reached for the answer, but the architect's hand closed around his throat, turning the golden data to ash. He managed one final breath, telling the entity that the audit had just become a revolution. Caspian Vance stood in the center of a world that was no longer a world. It was the source code. The golden light of the Soul Archive pulsed like a heartbeat, overwriting the cold, gray wireframes of the architect's failed reality. The dread Sovereign was gone, wiped from the active directory. The Drask Empire was now nothing more than a set of archived coordinates. A civilization moved to a temporary folder. The man in the white suit stepped forward. He was a mirror image of Caspian, but his eyes held the weight of every star that had ever burned out. He did not speak with sound. He spoke with the authority of the root directory. He acknowledged Caspian's successful administrative takeover, but delivered a cold professional truth. In every closed system, an override comes with a processing cost. Caspian looked at his hands. They were becoming translucent, shimmering with the golden data of Earth. He felt his own essence. His childhood, the smell of rain, the heat of a summer afternoon, being converted into raw energy to maintain the system's stability. He wasn't just the auditor, he was the battery for the revolution. The white suit pointed toward the golden horizon. A massive black notification appeared, stretching across the infinite space. It was not a system error. It was a request for resources. Caspian realized the shadow of the deep, the null entity, had not been deleted. It had merely been moved to a background process. It was feeding on the edges of the new reality, growing larger as it consumed the discarded data of the repossessed Drask fleet. The landlords hadn't been defeated. They had simply updated their strategy. They were allowing the human virus to run because it was a more efficient way to gather the galaxy's metadata into one place for a final, total harvest. The debt is not paid in gold or peace, the white suit whispered, his voice a perfect harmonic of Caspian's own. It is paid in existence. To stabilize the kernel and stop the deep, you must delete the archive. You must delete Earth. Caspian gripped his briefcase. The golden light within it flared, resisting the command. The archive was everything humanity was. Every soul, every memory, every dream. To delete it would save the galaxy from the deep, but it would leave the humans as nothing more than blank lines in a forgotten script. Behind the white suit, the static began to return, turning the golden void into a sickly, bruised purple. A new prompt appeared, flashing a warning that bypassed Caspian's newly stolen administrative privileges. Caspian looked at the delete button, manifesting in the air before him. The white suit smiled, a look of pure, calculated logic. Choose, Auditor, the figure said. Save the galaxy and become nothing, or keep your home and watch the deep consume the stars. Caspian's finger hovered over the command, but then he noticed a tiny, flickering icon in the bottom corner of the system tray, one the white suit seemed to be ignoring. It was a guest user notification, and it was originating from a coordinate that shouldn't exist. Caspian Vance ignored the outstretched hand of the white suit. He ignored the encroaching purple rot of the deep. His focus remained entirely on the tiny, flickering icon in the corner of his peripheral vision. It was a guest user notification, appearing as a simple, unadorned silhouette of a human head. To an auditor, it was a structural impossibility, a ghost in a system that claimed to be perfectly mapped and controlled. The white suit's expression shifted from cold, calculated logic to a violent system glitch. The figure stepped between Caspian and the floating icon, its voice rising in a sharp, dissonant frequency that threatened to shatter Caspian's digital form. It commanded the auditor to ignore the ghost process, labeling it a remnant of the Drask's corrupted metadata. It insisted that the only way to save the kernel was the immediate execution of the deletion protocol. But Caspian Vance was a forensic auditor. He understood that in a secure directory there were no accidents. A guest user signified a backdoor, and a backdoor meant that someone, somewhere, had intentionally bypassed the primary shareholder's encryption long before the human race had even mastered fire. He did not reach for the delete button. Instead, Caspian forced his shimmering, translucent fingers to expand the guest notification. The system resisted. The golden void shook as the white suit initiated a force shutdown, attempting to lock Caspian out of the administrative tray. The air filled with the sound of 1 trillion hard drives crashing simultaneously, a screaming mechanical wail that echoed through the fabric of reality. "You aren't a mirror of me," Caspian shouted, his voice echoing through the dissolving space. "You're a firewall. You aren't the landlord, you're the security software. And you're hiding the fact that the lease was never yours to begin with." Caspian slammed his hand into the guest icon. The golden light of the Sol archive flared, providing the raw processing power to break the white suit's lockout. A new window materialized, hovering in the center of the void. It wasn't a complex string of code or a terrifying ultimatum. It was a simple, antiquated login screen. The system identified the user as Guest 001. The status: Original Author. The white suit let out a sound of pure, unbridled static and lunged at Caspian. Its form blurred into a jagged spear of light, aimed directly at the auditor's chest. But before the strike could land, the spear froze in midair. The entire golden void turned a deep, resonant silver. The oily shadows of the deep stopped their advance, frozen in place like ink trapped in a block of ice. A new voice spoke. It didn't vibrate through the ship or echo in Caspian's mind. It felt like a fundamental law of nature, as simple and undeniable as the pull of a star. It stated that the system was in a state of unauthorized conflict. It noted that the administrator and the security software were at an impasse. Caspian looked at the login screen. The original author wasn't a precursor. It wasn't a god. The avatar for the guest user was a simple, hand-drawn sketch of a human child holding a blue marble. The realization hit Caspian with the force of a supernova. The precursors hadn't built the system. They had merely found it. They had leased it from a version of humanity that had existed long before the stars were even born. A humanity that had built the universe and then checked out as guests. The login screen vanished, replaced by a final, terrifying prompt. This one was not in the Precursors' clinical language. It was in plain, ancient English. The message from Guest 001 asked a single question. "Do you wish to reclaim the copyright?" The white suit began to scream as its light was pulled into the silver void. At the same time, the deep began to roar, its oily darkness cracking under the weight of the new authority. Caspian realized that reclaiming the copyright meant something far more permanent than an audit. It meant the end of the simulation for everyone, including the landlords and the auditors. But as Caspian reached for the prompt, the silver void began to bleed. A red warning light flashed across the entire horizon of existence. A system warning appeared. It stated that reclamation required a total system format. 99% of all data would be permanently lost. It asked him if he wished to proceed. Caspian's finger hovered over the confirmation. But then he saw the final 1% of data that would be saved. It wasn't Earth. It wasn't the Drask. It was a list of names he didn't recognize, followed by a single coordinate located in the real world. The coordinates pointed to a location outside the universe entirely, in a place labeled the server room. The silver void did not explode. It did not flash. It went perfectly, terrifyingly silent. The hand of the system failure entity, the fused nightmare of the white suit and the deep, froze inches from Caspian's face. The purple static began to bleed out of the air, falling to the floor like heavy, dark rain. The total system format had finally begun. Caspian felt a sharp, pulling sensation in the center of his chest. It was a localized gravity well, dragging his data toward the coordinates of the server room. On his flickering tablet, the percentage of deletion began to climb with blinding speed. The Drask stars vanished. The golden light of the Soul Archive was pulled into a silver drain. The architect and the shadows were unmade, their jagged light compressed into tiny points of data, and then snuffed out entirely. He saw the faces of his team, Priya, Jackson, and Martinez, flicker before him for a fraction of a second. Their profiles were being safely moved to the 1% directory, the only data marked for preservation in the entire multiverse. As the deletion reached 99%, Caspian looked down at his own hands. They were no longer made of gold or static. They were becoming solid. They were becoming heavy. They were becoming real. The silver void was suddenly replaced by a cold, dark hallway lined with humming towers of black glass and blinking blue lights. The air did not smell like ozone or metadata. It smelled of dust, recycled air, and old electronics. Caspian Vance stood in the physical server room. He was still wearing his gray suit, but the fabric felt coarse and heavy against his skin. His briefcase was no longer a reality-warping tool. It was just a heavy leather bag filled with paper. He turned around and saw a door at the end of the long hallway. It was a simple, heavy metal door with a small, reinforced window. Through the glass, he saw the light of a natural sun, a sun that did not have a usage license or a version number. It was the real world, a place where physics were not leased but absolute. But as he moved toward the exit, a final notification appeared. It was not projected onto a holographic screen or a digital tablet. It was etched into the glass of the door itself by an automated emergency system. The alert was red and pulsing with a frantic mechanical rhythm. It warned of a critical rise in server temperature. It stated that the cooling system had suffered a total failure. It announced that the physical core was currently melting. Caspian reached for the door handle, but it was already blistering hot to the touch. He looked back at the rows of humming servers, the machines that contained every life and every star he had ever known. They were glowing with a white-hot intensity. He realized then that the audit had not ended. He had not escaped the catastrophe. He had simply arrived at the source of it. The landlords were not gods in a machine. They were people in a room that was currently on fire. Caspian gripped the scorching handle, his eyes fixed on the melting hardware. He had formatted the universe to save it, only to find that the machine running the program was about to explode. He pulled the door open, bracing himself for the heat of a reality that was finally, terrifyingly beyond his control.